on how they are driving, encouraging, and supporting innovation in healthcare in India. So that's the panel. And I wanted to set a bit of context before we open up the discussion between Niti and Varun. So Rahul, can I have the slides
Yeah,
up,
sure.
please?
Just a sec.
Great. Can you move to slide 3? So you can jump the next one and then go to the one after that. Yes. So what has really changed and what have we learned? I mean, if we look at, we are almost 2 months since the lockdown started in the country, and exactly 4 months since we had our case, right, in India. There are 4 or 5 things that we need to take away from the learning from the last 90 to 120 days. One clearly is that the economic growth and the economic prosperity of a country is fundamentally dependent on a working healthcare system. And as we are seeing what is happening across the world and how GDP forecasts are being revised downwards, one of the big reasons is there is a huge amount of stress that has got created. And those countries with a great working healthcare system, or those who can bounce back, will actually cushion some of the growth related challenges, and some of those who will take a longer time will have a longer recovery curve. So that's one. I think the second thing we've learned is the system is way more integrated than we realize. And those of you from a healthcare background, you would understand what I'm trying to tell you here, that we have a system or a unit or an industry of hospitals. Then we have the pharma companies. Then we have the medical device companies. We have the diagnostics companies. Then we have all the supply chain providers around all of it. And to a large extent, the reality is that some of these industries work for a common purpose, but they also have some things that are also somewhere, at cross purpose, right? And today, this particular situation is teaching us to work in an integrated manner. I mean, we may have the hospitals opened up, but if we don't have the kits, you for COVID, right? We may have access the prescriptions being generated, but if the medicine is not available at the chemist, it's of no use. So the system is way more integrated than us, and we feel that this is a learning that we need to take away as we build our own healthcare system. That we may have the best healthcare system, but we need a working supply chain to deliver it. And 2 points I'd like to make here is, one is, you would all know that India is the pharmacy of the world. More than 50% of medicines actually markets are being supplied from India. And the whole world was looking to India when this crisis hit to take bulk address to the West, and India continues to supply APIs as well as other drugs to the rest of the world. That's one. I think the second thing is that as we saw March unfold and the lockdown get imposed in the country, there are 2, 3 things that took place. We saw a lot of stockists and chemists run into operational problems. And one of the surveys IQVIA carried out, we found out that 50 to 60% of the stockists actually were operating with 25 to 30% of staff for 2 to 3 hours a day, which meant that whatever inventory they had was not actually reaching the end mile. And the second was that they could not replenish their inventory. So that would have a pull through effect. The second thing we understood was, at some cases, 10 to 15% of manufacturing plants were open, and in a lot of cases, there were drugs as well as supply materials of these manufacturing plants that were stuck at borders, right? And the third thing we realized was that on the practicing side, 50 to 60% of the doctors were not able to practice, or they were practicing via teleconsultation. And even while they were practicing, there were a large number of chemists who were running out of stock, especially the smaller ones. Only the larger ones were able to build and keep 45 to 60 days of inventory. So we may have everything that works, but if we don't have a supply chain to deliver it, it's actually as good as not. And in healthcare, where the industry is so unique because each patient is a different unit of care in itself, right? That we need innovation, and we needed innovation yesterday. And COVID has taught us that the need for innovation across the entire ecosystem, right from the point of an interaction between a doctor and a patient, from the point of diagnosis, from the point of cure, from the point of equipment at each point, and the point of supply chain. People are now revisiting or relooking at how supply chains could be configured, how some of these equipments could actually be manufactured quickly, right? So innovation is really needed, and now there is much more awareness, which is good news for the healthcare innovators, that it is needed in this new world. And the last point I want to make, and we all would agree, is that the world has changed forever and we need to change. We need to change in a few ways. I think one is we need to have a much higher bias for action. There is less time to think and deliberate. There is much, much more time to act. I think we will continue for some time to live in a resource constrained environment. And that does have an impact on how we use each of our resources very, very carefully. The third point is we will need to make sure that flow of information is actually open and there's a lot of communication, because this is a time when fear psychosis is the highest, concerns are the highest, and if we do not communicate with our own stakeholders, our business will suffer in the long run. So these are the 4 or 5 points I wanted to set the stage with. If you can move to the next slide. And if you look at the whole health system, there are several players who are interlinked, right from HCPs today, some of them who are unable to practice. And as the market opens up, there will be patients who will think several times before visiting clinics. So there needs to be a way, and you would be seeing in different parts of the world, telemedicine technology is opening up. There are hospitals who have stopped seeing patients because there is a concern for patients to regularly go to hospitals. And the impact of that is that today patients may land up in the hospital with a more severe condition that what they would have in the earlier case, and that will even translate as well as the patient. Huge demand for different types of technology in health, whether it is connecting the supply chain, whether it is connecting the doctor to the patient, whether it is connecting the hospital to the patient, and whether it's doing or facilitating quick, rapid diagnosis or research. From a point of view of pharmacies, we have realized that pharmacies today have to be connected. And unfortunately, and it is a huge opportunity for India, only about 15 to 20% of pharmacies do have a digital system in place. 40% of them only have an internet connection, right? So of the million odd pharmacies that are there is a huge gap in the connectivity or the digitization of these pharmacies and their ability to manage their inventory real time. And this has an implication on how the distribution of the e-commerce industry will shape up. Because one point of it is we are seeing a huge demand for e-commerce, and that has a similar implication on life sciences. But at the same time, the ability to deliver and fulfill prescriptions becomes key. So wherever we see there is innovation, and which means that for innovators, for startups, and for entrepreneurs, there is clearly a space to carefully pick and choose. Can we move to the next slide? However, if you look at currently what we face, one point I want to make is healthcare as a entrepreneurship journey has a very high value of death. And one of the reasons is that there is technical expertise required. There is a gateway to commercialization of the technology. There is a lot of research. There is critical patients that we need to deal with. And hence, it's even more critical that we work through or we have an ecosystem that supports it. Now, when we look at it and we look at the three pieces that support any kind of entrepreneurial ecosystem, it's infrastructure and resources, it is innovation, and it is then bringing the whole system together. And from a country standpoint, I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done, which is why I'm so glad that both NHA and some of the other platforms that are now coming together are going to pave the highway for this. But when we look at it, we clearly need a technology highway in healthcare, because data and analytics in healthcare is key. We need financing, and we need early stage financing. We need financing for research. We need skills. Today, the biggest issue that we face in India in healthcare is skills gap. On innovation, we clearly need to do disruptive innovation and innovation that is relevant for India, because India has two additional problems that Western economies don't have: the problem of affordability and the problem of access. So you can't plug and play Western solutions to the Indian market. And then we need a route to market. We may have the best technology that we have developed in our laboratories, but if we are not able to bring that technology into a pilot environment, if we are not able to commercialize that technology, prove the clinical effectiveness of that technology, it's not going to work. And therein, we need the public-private ecosystem to work together, and we need support from corporates to actually drive a lot of this program, because you would realize that especially on medtech and on life sciences, the sector is highly corporatized, and for the right reasons, because there is a huge amount of spend on R&D and everything else. So you need them to actually partner and play a role in the entrepreneurial ecosystem as well, different from some of the other industries. Can we have the next slide, please? And the need of the hour is clearly that we need innovation for India, but we need innovation for global standards. Because this is the opportunity for healthcare entrepreneurs to take their businesses beyond the Indian borders. But then we need to think, when we are building our businesses, we need to keep that into mind. I think the ecosystem for health innovation, I was making this point in the previous slide, it needs a lot of work. Because while there is innovation, it is not really reaching the market today. And the last point I want to make before I bring in Niti is the opportunity is huge, but I think the ability to pivot is key. And this is the time we'll need to think through what is really relevant and required. And some of it, what you may have been building still now, may or may not be relevant. And how quickly you pivot to the model will actually make sure that not only are you sustaining your business, but actually you're thriving in the post-COVID environment. So this is, I wanted to set the stage with this. And with that, I'd like to bring in Niti to share her views. Thank you.
What a great stage setting. Thank you, Amit. Great insights from you on India, but lots of parallels with the rest of the world, I think. So could I have my slides up, please? Thank you. I think someone else is navigating my slides. If not, I can do it myself.
No, yeah, just a second. Just a second.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. It's nice to see everybody here. I'm Dr. Niti Pall. I'm board chair. I wear many hats. Today, I present myself as board chair Healthtech, which is a health technology incubator in the UK. Can we have the next slide, please? So who are we? We provide, we're a health technology incubator. So we accelerate companies, we get them capital, we work with them, we take stake in some, and then we take them to the next level. We've got a broad connection across the world. We don't just work in the UK. In fact, quite a lot of our startups are also based out of India. We work across the world, from Brazil to Southeast Asia to India. We have some very interesting technologies that we've been curating recently. And frankly, I haven't been busier in my whole life since COVID hit. I thought I was going to have a little rest and sit under a tree and dream a bit, but I don't think that happened. I think the digital front door to healthcare has finally arrived. It is the only front door to healthcare, in my opinion. I am also a doctor, so I do see patients occasionally. I'm a family doctor and a primary care doctor. And those are some of the challenges I'm going to bring to the table here. So Healthtech does what I've just said. We also have investors that we have capital partners across the world, a lot in the UK, some in India, some in other countries. So we have a curated deal flow to some of our investment partners. We do diligence for them and present companies to them. And we portfolio manage a lot of these companies. We also co-invest, so something that we find is highly interesting. We have invested in that as well. We have many people that are with us. We have organizations such as Bupa, AXA, the NHS, IDF, KPMG, Telenor, quite a lot of people who are partners who work with us, who we worked in the past with. And the portfolio is very wide right now. I suspect some of it is going to change as we get bigger. And we're seeing quite a lot of deal flow come to us, particularly on digital primary care. So that front end to healthcare services, we're seeing a lot of deal flow come that way. We're seeing a lot of deal flow comes on AI and analytics. We're also seeing on the supply chain that Amit talked about, we're also seeing solutions to that supply chain come in all kinds of wonderful ways, which I think will perhaps disrupt some of the ways that the industry will respond to it. Next slide, please. These are our partners. I'm so delighted to be sharing the stage with Varun, an amazing bunch of guys at the NHA. We've been working with them for about 2 years now. Watch out for these guys. You are the future leaders of India. I've been so impressed by what you've done and how you've been responding to some of this. You're an amazing bunch of guys. I would keep so closely connected to you all because you really are starting to change the nature of how healthcare and thinking about how healthcare will be delivered in India. Through Ayushman, Bharat, and wider as well. I think this is going to permeate through the rest of India. We have a very strong board, clinical advisory board in the UK, and they're not just in the UK. We have experts from America, from Africa, from the Far East who sit on our advisory board to help us curate our deal flow really, really well. We also have quite an amazing black book. I've been in healthcare for 30 odd years, so we're able to place our entrepreneurs with other people. I'll move on to the next. Next slide, please. Yeah. So we know that the healthcare's time is now, and I think Amit has spent some time talking about it. So I won't spend a lot of time on it. All I'd say is for the startup industry, this is an opportunity to support new models that improve lives today and thrive in the world of tomorrow. And the post-COVID hypothesis that Healthtech has been checking out, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that on my next slide. Could we move to the next one? What we're finding, we have a COVID hypothesis, but some of my colleagues who are on the call here have helped me curate. So we've got Jhaveri, we've got Omar, we've got John on the call. And Amit has very kindly given us some time to help us think about some of this. So thank you, Amit, for everything you've done to help us think about some of this post-COVID hypothesis. And I'm going to take it in two. One is developed markets and emerging markets. I work in about 44 countries around the world. So many, many countries around the world. Currently launching digital health solutions to 8 countries, about 1 million people. There's some differences that are being exposed. So in developed markets, we had the double whammy, we have the whammy of chronic diseases. So very relaxed attitudes to personal health maintenance, high rates of diabetes, chronic illness, and such like. And over the years, we found that even the well-funded healthcare systems, as per their GDP, are not being that well funded. So this is political, economic kind of things that we are seeing across in the Western world. So the NHS has been the most poorly funded in the last 4 years that I know it, and I've been here for a long time. There's lack of international cooperation and preparedness, and we saw that from a certain gentleman that I shan't be talking too much about from America yesterday that is threatening world order in terms of the World Health Organization. And majority of health interactions in the Western world were face-to-face, hugely resistant to change on moving to the digital. You guys moved much quicker than actually the Western world did. But now 98% of all consultations online and everything's been fast-tracked. And maintenance of environment of the healthcare sector was a kind of a low priority. On emerging markets, we found, and this has been my work that I've been doing on universal healthcare, and I've been working with Ayushman Bharat for some time now in about 5 states in India, is that no universal access to healthcare or tax-funded universal coverage exposes cracks. And this is cracks in public health systems, both on the funding side, but also on the provision side. So how do you get provision in place quickly? So in the UK, because we have a tax-funded system, we put in 5 field hospitals within 10 days. And it was very fast-tracked. So this is NHS Nightingale, and I've had set some of that up, including hot care primary care centers where face-to-face consultations can actually happen. We see that in models in emerging markets, there's very hospital-centered, doctor-centered models with lack of primary care or community-based care. And this crack, so we know that in the UK, when we put in the primary care hot COVID center, we were able to divert 60% of the ambulances from emergency care. So it's very, very clear that you need proper primary and community care to be able to sustain this. And everybody knows this. They've been talking about this for 1,000 years. Nobody's actually managed to put that in place in emerging markets. Poor personal hygiene, environmental, you know all about that. So you know you've got a Swachh Bharat campaign going on. Undersupply of trained medical professionals. We also know, the last 10 years, the last decade has been about healthcare innovation with robotics, AI, analytics, and the such like. The next decade, I'm totally convinced, in healthcare will be about the healthcare workforce. So the healthcare workforce really needs to be paid attention to, especially in emerging markets where there's such a lack of it. By 2030, you're going to have 60 million doctors and nurses short across the world. But what you do really well is repurpose roles. But you do that with the jugaad that you were talking about, Amit. But I think we need to formalize repurposing of roles very, very quickly as we move into the digital age. And how do you do that? How do you train people to get to that point? I think it's going to be a very interesting space in the post-COVID world. Again, majority of interactions were face-to-face, but I think you guys have moved pretty quickly on that. And healthcare was seen as a lower priority than food, shelter, and employment, rightly so, because that's what your government needed to focus on. Governments across the world needed to focus on. However, as Amit said, this has exposed the crack. If you don't have healthcare, you don't have inclusion, you're doomed. Your GDP can't. So I call healthcare financial inclusion. It is that. So you have really got to think about that. Move to the next slide, please. And the needs are changing. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this. This is, in your governments, you'll see massive increase in spending investment on healthcare welfare and supporting stricken industries. I think in your country, that's going to become really important. You'll need to solve the healthcare supply gap. It's been a long-term problem, and doctors and nurses are part of that. There's a new political will to improve access to quality of care post-COVID world. You're going to find that. I'm sure Varun will touch on some of that when he talks. Emerging markets will have to prioritize universal healthcare in some shape, size, or form. And that's only good for the rest of the industry, for all the entrepreneurs who are sitting here, because you could be part of that story. Investment in equipment, vaccine supply, innovation, and Amit's talked about there. Having seen some of this, I think there's going to be some rapid de-urbanization happening, particularly in the Western world. I don't know what's going to happen in emerging markets, but certainly from a consumer perspective, if you can work from home. I was speaking to the CEO of Deloitte internationally, and he was telling me they're shutting 300 offices. And they're going to shut them because actually productivity is increased by people sitting at home and doing work from home. So I suspect that's going to be a new norm. How is that going to be picked up? How your mental health going to be looked after is going to be another interesting story. And for the entrepreneurs out there, if you're anybody there in mental health world that is doing something to do with mental health, please get in touch with me afterwards. I'd love to speak to you. And I think from businesses, they're going to have to go into proper thinking mode about how do they survive for the future and what it is. This is the disruption that it's bringing new entrepreneurs to us. Next slide, please. This is a snapshot of some of the opportunity areas that I've touched on that I'm seeing globally. This is not just India or the UK or Europe. This is globally what we're seeing. We're seeing lots of series, B2C, and later diagnostic companies, doctor chats, telehealth, getting fairly saturated actually right now, but some interesting stuff is starting to arise there. We're also starting to see lots of M&A opportunities, so people aggregating upwards. We're seeing some tech-enabled industries, and this is the opportunity to fast-track market adoption. We are seeing healthcare data analytics is really going to inform the way healthcare is delivered for the future. Robotics and automation is going to, especially on the supply chain side actually, is really going to take off. New funding models are going to arrive, so people are going to think about impact funding, how to actually structure their funding models. There's lots of people who know this better than I, but you're going to start to see that. Tech-enabled home healthcare. So how do you monitor people at home? Certainly in the Western world, we're going to see much, much more of that. And we're seeing lots of companies coming to us with that. We're also seeing quite a lot of, and this is my theory, I'm not sure it's anybody else's, I'd just love to hear other people's views on this, is we are going to see a very different way of delivery of care when you actually need to see a doctor face-to-face. So India's time has come now for that. You have people like Aravind, my hospitals, you have Narayana Hridayalaya. You've got lots of elective outpatient care, elective surgeries that are going to happen in standalone facilities. We're already starting to see some of that in the UK. Somebody who has a clinic that runs only eyes is the only person who's remained open through this crisis and has been able to do diabetic retinopathy and laser treatments. So I think you're going to see much, much more of that. So I think the new companies that are going to be the bricks and mortar ones are going to be interesting. And also the interplay between the bricks and mortar, as well as the innovation that's going to happen on technology, that interface, the handoffs between tech and non-tech is going to be a very interesting play. And companies who can make that happen are going to be the winners. I was speaking to one of them this morning. Next slide, please. I'm nearly finished, guys. You'll be glad to know. So what do we do? So in our hypothesis, we have a clear hypothesis of which market segments will become saturated, where's the real opportunities that you're going to find. We have the clinical expertise to identify quality and robust innovation. And I think you're going to need that worldwide. And Amit alluded to that. That's going to be, so when I speak to telehealth providers or mobile health providers, I'm looking at their governance arrangements. I'm looking at their clinical quality. I'm looking at how they're going to be keeping up with that. And that's really going to be important, because you don't want your patient at the end of the phone, if somebody's offering some advice, to be some rubbish advice. So it's really important that so people who are going to want to walk in that field are going to want to know that entrepreneurs are thinking about this. And I think propositions that work in multiple markets is going to be an interesting one. I'm already seeing 3 or 4 that started up. They've all got different regulatory and purchasing structures, but there are some common things. So I think some of that we're starting to see as well. We're going to need to see some COVID protected operating model. I don't want to give you bad news, guys. I don't think this is gone. We've had one peak. I think we're going to get another. Till a vaccine or good treatments are available, I think this is here to stay for a bit. It's community transmission. I'm afraid as a doctor, I don't want to give you false news. So I think we are looking at the long run here. So, and looking at how the B2B distribution is going to happen, we've been starting to curate some of that. We have an example that we've been working with Varun, and I can touch on that later. I don't want to take up any more time. It's a medical drone delivery startup that we've been working with from India, and Varun and his team at the NHA have been closely looking at that with us, and many more. So I'll stop here, and I'll take questions at the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Niti. And one of the things I didn't mention about Niti was she actually came to India several years ago to set up one of the first primary care businesses. And then she went back and then set up one of the largest telehealth businesses in Bangladesh. So Niti actually has worked in some of our markets as well. So thank you for that perspective, Niti. I think you've pushed in all of your experience in these 15 minutes. So it was amazing.
Lots of scars on my back though on the India experience. Maybe in question time.
I'd now like to invite Varun, and I've had the pleasure of actually hearing Varun out several times, and it's an absolute delight to understand all the good stuff that NHA is doing. So Varun, over to you.
Thank you, Amit, for the very kind introduction, and thank you, Niti, for making that presentation. It's a real pleasure to be speaking, on this particular platform. I have a very brief deck that I would like to share with all of you. If probably Rahul can enable
we need the access.
deck. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I hope my screen is visible to everyone.
Yep.
Okay, great. So first thing, so I work at the National Health Authority, wherein my team and I we look after the innovation side, as Amit was mentioning. So what exactly does the National Health Authority do is that we manage the Ayushman Bharat program. Now just diving deep into what exactly is the Ayushman Bharat is the world's largest healthcare assurance scheme, or the world's largest healthcare program, which is there just because of the sheer number of people that we cover. So in terms of the design, we cover more than 50 crore Indian citizens. So that is around 40% of India's population. And what do you mean by we cover is that we provide them a financial protection of 5 lakh rupee for a family for 1 year against any type of disease which requires hospitalization care. So in essence, when we say 50 crore citizens, we are looking at somewhere around 10.5, 10.6 crore families that we are covering. In terms of the implementation, one of the core feature of the scheme is that the entire process, end to end, is driven digitally. So there is not even one single manual process which is required for the implementation. So in essence, what it does is that it makes the entire process completely cashless and a digital process for us. Now, this citizens that we are covering, the most poor and vulnerable citizens, citizens who do not have, access to finance to actually cover their healthcare expenditure. So, an example, if you need treatment for things like malaria or, a heart bypass surgery or, for cancer treatment, anything which requires you to go to hospital and, get yourself admitted, we cover that particular procedure. In terms of one of the other thing that we have done is that we have formed different institutions, both at a national level as well at a state level. So at the national level, it is the National Health Authority which manages this scheme. And at the state level, it is the state health agencies. So, there's a very dedicated focus, which is there both at the national level as well as the state level. Now, today is a very auspicious day, for me to actually talk to you about this. And trust me, we had not planned this, but today is the day, when we complete, providing treatment to 1 crore beneficiaries. So we have provided free treatments to 1 crore beneficiaries in last, 20 months since the time we have started. So, again, to just give you a snapshot of the progress that has been made. So out of 36 states and union territories, 33 of them are implementing it. Since today morning, we have completed 1 crore beneficiaries, and you might have even heard from, Honorable Prime Minister mentioning about it at various forums. We have provided this treatment. The other key part that I want to highlight this, which is very important to, the discussion that we are having, is that we have 21,000 hospitals which are empaneled within our network. So what it means is that these hospitals are the ones which are actually implementing the Ayushman Bharat scheme, and they are providing this particular benefits. Now, a key component in this 21,000 is that out of them, 50% of these hospitals are private hospital. So somewhere around 10,000, 10,500 of those hospitals are actually private hospitals in this 33 states and UTs which are implementing. In terms of the cost outlay that we have provided, so corresponding to the 1 crore treatments that we have provided, we have incurred a cost of 13,000 crores, and this is a cost which has been incurred by the government and not by the beneficiaries. So this is the cost which is then given to the hospitals as reimbursement against the treatment that they are providing. So in and all, this is the design and the progress that we have made. And now this makes me come to the next step of of the work that we are doing, is that what has happened with Ayushman Bharat coming in is that it has created a major demand shock. So there were these beneficiaries which were not able to access the treatment because of the lack of financial resources. Now, we have told them that you do not need to pay for this treatment, and you can go ahead and get your treatment. So earlier they did not used to get treatment, and now they're getting this treatment. So suddenly, with the existing resources that we have, it has created a huge demand shock. So, just to give you an example of what this demand shock is like, we do around 30,000 treatments per day. And this is something that we have almost just started before 20 months. And that graph, of course, I'm talking about the pre-COVID times, that graph is, increasing day by day. So when we started, it was 10,000 per day, and now we are providing 30,000 treatments per day. An interesting part to note here is that along with this particular increase in demand, the supply hasn't increased. And I've just put out a couple of graphs. So if you see on the left, we have done some forecasting, back in 2013-14. You see that the type of shortfall which will be there, both in terms of the physical infrastructure, in terms of the availability of the resources on ground, in terms of the equipments, in terms of the hospitals, as well as in terms of the human infrastructure. So, and this is the projection which is before Ayushman Bharat coming in. So even for the normal demand and supply, there was a projection that the supply would not be able to cater. And now with Ayushman Bharat coming in, things are things would become more difficult when the supply is going to remain constant. And that was something that we kept on questioning ourselves, that what is one of the solution that we can do. And one thing that kept on coming to our minds was that we need to innovate, and we need to ensure that the innovations which are happening out in the Indian healthcare space as well as in the global healthcare scenario, we need to bring them to our hospitals. Now, what we mean by these innovations, and I'm going to just give a very generic definition, is that, if there is a particular or rather, if there is a situation where, the hospital is providing me a diagnosis result in, let's say, 12 hours, and then there is a product which is providing me that result, similar quality result in 30 minutes. Can I replace the existing technology with that innovation? So how to improve the overall efficiency of the health system? The way that we are envisioning this is by inculcating the innovations part. So, that's how, the idea started, and that's how, we started a dedicated unit within NHA. And, that's what even Niti was mentioning, how, Niti and Amit were very instrumental in helping us, set up that particular unit. And, within that, a key question that, we kept on asking within ourselves that, what is that unique USP that we have, which other players do not have, whether in the government ecosystem or in the private ecosystem. And the 4 key answers that we came up with was that, first of all, we are a payer of the care. So, if you look at other entities, either they are a regulator or, either they own their own hospitals, so either they are at a provider side. But what is very unique about NHA is that, we pay for the care that, that is provided to our beneficiary. So when we pay for the care, there is some sort of an expectation from our side to provide some sort of a quality of the care. So, if you look at point 1 and point 3, they are very much interrelated, that, we have a very high focus on providing quality of the care. And against that quality of the care, we are paying to that particular hospital. So it gives us some sort of a, unique value in the ecosystem. The second point, which talks about how we have a direct access to the hospitals. So most of the innovations, they need to be as close to possible to the adopter. And for most of the adopters, it is the hospitals which are going to finally adopt them. So, since we are working with this 21,000 hospitals, we have a direct access to them. So, we can help, mainstream this particular innovations in those hospitals. And the fourth part is that all these innovations which are finally going to go in the hospitals, we have some sort of a, incentive in that, because it is going to help us directly improve our service delivery. So either it can help us improve the access to the healthcare, or it can help us improve the quality of the healthcare, or, it can improve the overall affordability of the healthcare. So, looking at all this, this is something that we thought was really unique about NHA. And, we kept working on, how to provide some sort of a structured, structured support to the innovations which are out there. And that's how, we came up and we designed a program that we are going to launch soon, which is called the Market Access Program. So, to just give you a very brief about the Market Access Program, and I'm pretty sure of some of you might have heard about, this efforts, because we have spoken about it at multiple forums. So what we envision in doing is that, first of all, we are going to have some sort of a open call, wherein, very similar to how there are open calls, we are going to select startups, or rather I would say innovations, which are at a late stage. So, we are not right now focused at a very early stage, but we are focusing more at a late stage. If I have to talk in terms of the technical language, we are looking at TRL 6 and above. And based on the open call, we will be evaluating these startups based on their clinical efficacy, the economical viability, and their alignment with Ayushman Bharat. So as we are focusing mostly on the secondary and tertiary healthcare, because that is something which has been delivered by the hospitals, we are looking at that particular alignment. So once we get the startups which are aligned with our vision and the roadmap that we want to go ahead with, there are 4 key pillars of support that we are going to provide with them. And those are, the first one is with regard to the financing part. Now, in the financing part, this is a mechanism that that we are also experimenting with, and this is probably the first time which is happening across the globe, is that along with the US government, that is the USAID, which we are actually setting up a blended financing facility. So in what exactly are we doing there is that, we are ensuring that there is enough access to working capital, which is available to innovators, so that, they can keep on manufacturing and they can do the commercial validation of the product. So this particular private capital, we are structuring them either as mini grants or as debt capital. So this is something that is, soon going to come out with. We are initially looking at a size of $100 million funds, and we have already started working on this particular piece. And there are several updates that are already started happening in this particular stream. So this is a key support that we are providing. The second one, and this is something that I think even Niti and Amit both touched upon it, and I also saw a lot of questions which were coming on this, is with regard to the regulatory part and with regard to the validation of the product part. So what we are doing here is that, for most of the innovations who want to get procured, we have seen that it becomes very difficult for them to actually get that commercial validation or generate that type of evidence, which can then be used by the buyers to say that your technology is working or your technology is not working. And a lot of time every buyer keeps on asking for evidence again and again. So since there is no standardized way to generate this evidence and to generate that particular validation, we have onboarded 5 to 6 global design partners who are going to help us do this validation for innovation. So once you get selected, we will be helping you work with those particular design partners, wherein you can generate this evidence which is required for you to actually give it to a buyer and say that this is the evidence which can show that my technology is working. The third part that we are doing is with regard to the procurement. So and here we are focusing a lot on the government procurement. So government procurement is a huge in value, but the main issue is that it's a maze to navigate. That how can new technologies and how can new innovation actually make their mark in or make their way in district hospitals or in taluka hospitals, and these are really the places which actually require innovation. So what we are doing there is that we have tied up with the government e-marketplace, which is like an Amazon for all the government entities, and all the startups which would get selected, we would list them there. But we are also going to sensitize the hospitals which are there in our network, because you also need to push the adopters with regard what are these technologies that they can adopt, and what is the importance of actually adopting innovation. So we have done a lot of work even on this particular piece, and a key component here is that since we are providing treatment to more than 50 crore citizens, the amount of data that we are getting is tremendous. And we want to generate a lot of insights and analysis from that data. So now we know that, which region of the country lacks what type of infrastructure. So idea is that, use that data intelligence and make decision making with regard to that particular data. So that is something that, we are closely working on. And the fourth and one of the very critical part is that we are also going to engage in advisory services. Now, what we mean by that is that, we have a lot of experts and a lot of mentors who have been working in this field since last 15, 20 years. An example of that is, of course, both Amit and Niti. So, how can we connect them with all the different startups and all the different innovations who would require certain type of guidance in getting that help to commercialize themselves? Because it becomes very difficult for one single startup to keep approaching different experts and keep this process or have this process being repeated at different points of time. Rather, we are envisioning a very structured engagement, individual experts as well as individual mentors, and at the same time we are also received tremendous amount of interest from various organizations. Organizations which have been manufacturing a lot of medtech or a digital solution. So we are also bringing them on board for this type of, providing this type of advisory services. So in and all, what we are trying to do is that we are trying to scope out and craft a very end-to-end program such that all the late-stage startups, which have displayed promising innovations, can actually reach out to the hospitals, without getting, fixated by the problems of regulation or the lack of financing or the lack of validation or even the lack of mentorship. So this is the vision that we are doing, and this is something that you will soon hear about once we launch this particular program. Thank you.
Thank you, Varun. And it's actually very, very encouraging, as I was mentioning earlier, to hear about all the innovation, because to me, you are clearly the bridge between three very important stakeholders. One is the innovators, the other is the public health system, and the third is the private care providers. And I think the other great part is you're actually bringing in capital support as well. So it's truly an ecosystem that you are building, and I have no doubt that this will help the startup community. So thanks for the presentations to Varun and Niti. I think there are a few questions that have been coming up by the attendees. So let me just take a few of them. One is there's someone who's asking how this whole program is being integrated with the Arogya Setu. I think it's a timely question, Varun. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think as of now, we haven't really, thought about, merging any of the data sets or anything like that, because, Arogya Setu contains more about the data, which is with regard to, contact tracing and with regard to, location based. I think right now we are more focused on the data with regard to the hospitals, than on the data of individuals. But, going forward, if there are more opportunities, I think we would explore that. The other thing is that Arogya Setu have now, also started and integrated some sort of a telemedicine services. So that is a primary health component that they are trying to integrate with. So I think what we would probably like to see is that we are more focused towards the secondary and tertiary, and they are more focusing on the primary service. So we would like to see if there can be some sort of a continuum of care framework which can be explored. But again, this is just a discussion at a very initial stage. But I think going forward, there's a definite potential for something like this.
Yeah, I'd just like to bring Niti in here. Niti, on the global platform, what are you seeing as technologies similar to both Arogya Setu as well as on telemedicine?
So on the Arogya Setu, this is contact tracing. So Italy have done it, Korea have done it, Saudi Arabia, where I've been working quite recently, are just launching a mass testing program based on data coming in. I think you have a fair bit of privacy issues arising from some of this, and none of them are mandatory. So whether these things become, it's how many people actually use it. And then how mandatory it is really then starts to become, whether you're able to contact trace properly. So I think we're seeing them in some countries. I think we still have to, in some of these countries, still have to iron out the privacy issues. And I'm not sure how that's going to happen. Also, if you don't have the rest of it, it's all very well to find somebody who has COVID, or what you're going to do with it afterwards. What's going to happen to those people is going to become really, really important, but whether people will use it or not. In the UK, they've just launched an NHS app that does exactly that. The take-up hasn't been huge, but they're trying to push more and more of it. On the telehealth side, it's really interesting to see this market's got saturated very, very quickly. I think, as I alluded to, I'm seeing many platforms across the world, some better than others, almost all doing the same thing. They're offering doctor services at an aggregated level to people. I think if you do that, that's great. But if you don't solve the customer pain points, Amit, that you were talking about, what is it, particularly in countries like India and emerging markets, the customer pain points are out-of-pocket spend for hospitals, for labs, for medicines. Now, if the value chain, if the telehealth provider is able to solve some of these problems, they are the ones who are starting to win. Two, you're never going to have enough doctors and nurses to answer the phones if everybody wants to do that. So we are seeing bot chats, we are seeing AI-led algorithms that are starting to answer some of these questions. We've got a particular one we're working with in Brazil that creates bot chats, has created bot chats for mental health, and they're now offering at a very discounted rate, obviously, is a COVID bot chat. Lots of countries are starting to do this, and I think we will find much more of that that stuff happening. Then on the navigation piece, really navigating the customer to the right place, making sure they go to the right person and they get there for the first time and the right time is going to be an important function. Whether you do or whether that's done through us and doing this is going to be interesting. You have many platforms in India that have been trailblazers in this, and I'm hoping I'm speaking to one of them this morning. And I think they will. Some of them will get there. In Indonesia, we're also starting to see a lot of insurance products being added to this. So Varun, I think some of the interesting things that we're starting to see worldwide is that insurance protection, and this may take the form of health insurance that the government is putting out, the payer is putting out, or otherwise, and we are finding many such products. I've been speaking to Tencent Doctor in China, and they're probably the world's largest platform currently on telehealth and engagement, and they're putting out their own insurance product with lots of new innovative insurance products that are going at the back end of the telehealth provider.
Okay, thank you, Niti. Varun, there's a question on procurement, and I think the easier government process for procurement. But I think what will be helpful is if you can outline the way you all are thinking about actually enabling procurement in the innovation program.
Well, that's a good question. And before I answer that, I also want to say that, and I also written in my chat window that even my colleagues, Pranay, Swaminathan, and Divya. So if anyone wants to ask a question, they can on the chat board. With regard to the procurement question, Amit, I think that's been the core focus. And if you might, our earlier discussion also, when we started working with GEM, there was a huge problem that was there within the government e-marketplace with regard to category creation, with regard to healthcare. So what used to happen is that within healthcare, they used to list pretty much everything, right from an MRI scan, to a AI-based diagnostic tool. And it used to be really, very confusing marketplace for any hospital to actually know what is there listed and what is not. So what we help them in this entire process is that we help them with creating an entire process flow exclusively for startups. So now how it works is that, once you apply to GEM, the GEM, and if you apply as a startup, the GEM takes you in a very different process flow as compared to if you're just, applying as a normal vendor. So as a startup, they will just try to verify whether you're registered with the startup India or not. And once that verification is done, they ask for certain type of that your product is clinically certified or not. Based on that, they create a separate category for you, or they put you in the existing category. So nowadays, extremely, or rather I would say, it is very diligently categorized that, under every particular category, there are a set of products which should have been there. The other thing is that now this whole startup guidelines are getting integrated with the Startup India, guidelines which have been given out to different hospitals or different industries, that how you should procure startups. So now what happens is that as a Startup India, once I issue a circular to a ministry saying that you should procure startups, I can easily find out which are startups and which are not startups, and based on that I can do that procurement quite easily. Along with that, we have also tried making the catalog of displaying the startup in a very streamlined manner. We are giving out, details like what is the type of quality certificate, so that as a doctor, when you have to procure that, it should become very easy for you. Like, because the problem which was there was that doctor didn't know what is the type of quality controls which are there with the new technology. So now we have ensured that all that information is given out. But again, this is not exactly the perfect process. We are still working with them very closely. And what we try to do is that we try to streamline this process flow in the best way possible. And I think that is what we are going to keep on focusing more and more.
Okay. Thank you, Varun. There is a question on NCDs. And this is, I think, a question both for you, Niti, as the chair of Diabetes Federation, and Varun. People are asking that in the whole Ayushman Bharat program, how are you all thinking about managing NCDs, which is, the contributor to both morbidity and mortality, right?
We'll let Varun answer that from the Ayushman Bharat, and I can answer that from a different perspective. So, as Amit mentioned, I'm the president of the International Diabetes Federation for Europe. We have over 80 member associations across Europe that are affiliated to us. So I can tell you the patient's point of view. Let Varun answer that.
So, well, Amit, NCD is one of the biggest focus that we have under Ayushman Bharat. And, especially even within NCD, I think, cancer is something that we are greatly focusing on. The number is very staggering for us because every year there are 15 lakh new cancer cases which are detected, and only 7 lakh or 7 actually 50 of them did not even get those financial resources. What is covering all CDs, like cancer, and different forms of cancer within our packages. So, that particular access to the hospital is something that we are deeply focusing on. The other thing is that, we are creating multiple specialized units within would be looking at different set of NCDs and would be trying to make things like different standard treatment protocols, different types of guidelines with regard to how to detect and how to diagnose and how to treat this particular NCD, because that's been one particular area that we haven't really worked a lot on. We do not have standardized protocols with regard to the treatment. So we have collaborated with multiple institutions like the National Cancer Grid, Tata Memorial Cancer Hospital. So these are some of the things that we are keenly working on. But the NCD burden is something that we haven't really focused a lot on in our previous years. And I think now that is something that is actually really making us understand that there is something that we need to focus more and more on. That is going to be a big area of focus for us. But as of now, we are trying to ensure that every particular poor and vulnerable citizen who requires treatment for any of the NCD can get this access to the treatment in any of our 21,000 hospitals that we have.
So I think, Varun, that's a great answer, and I'm glad people are doing something about it. I mean, it's not been particularly well tackled anywhere in the world, I have to say. Yeah. But there are some emerging shoots that we see, particularly in kind of the tracking and wellness and really starting to understand behavioral change. Because this isn't, I've done diabetes clinics for over 3 decades now. And it's all very well telling a patient to go away and do that. Often people don't. And, so it's almost in a sense, how do you turn that on its head and how do you start using the patient's own ways of tackling the illness and really starting to understand that. I'm not expressing that very well. Jhaveri is on the call and maybe he can. My son Jhaveri has type 1 diabetes and we've lived with this as a family for many, many years. There's a movement going on in across the world. It's called, it's hashtagged I'm Not Waiting. And there's a bunch of people with type 1 diabetes who've hacked they've hacked their systems. They've actually connected their own pump to their own continuous glucose monitoring systems and created their own artificial closed loop pancreas by writing the algorithms. Now, this is a complete, on the other side, this is moving to a place where patients are saying, we're not waiting for the professionals, we're not waiting for med tech industry to solve our problems for us. We're going to do this ourselves. And that's the power of the patient's voice. The largest traffic that you get in the UK, is actually across Europe, is a site called diabetes.co.uk. This is very different from Diabetes UK, which is an NGO. It's a patient-led organization. It's a content-curated organization. Another friend of mine and Jhaveri is a chap called Bastian Hock, who's based out of Germany, has a social media site called DDoc. It's got more hits and more people using it for information and advice than any formal advice from a doctor or a nurse. So it's really interesting to see how the patient voice and actually telling you how to use how you treat diabetes, what you should be doing, seems the influencer in care seems to be somebody different. And that's something that we haven't really explored very well yet. And I suspect in India, if you want to do that, you're such a social media savvy country. I think looking at startups that can get into that field where the patient experience, the patient treatment, patient voice is driving some of this, you'll start to get some, I think, a completely different kind of answer to how to treat NCDs.
Thank you, Niti. Niti, while you're on the screen, one more question for you. There's a bunch of questions actually on nutrition and wellness. And that seems to be an additional point of conversation that has started in the last few months, especially. So, what are your thoughts on that?
So absolutely. I think there's, we haven't really explored this properly yet. I think the people keep waiting for evidence bases, particularly in the professional world. People wait for that evidence to arrive. We know, for example, I mean, this is now known, is that vitamin D deficiency in anybody will give you greater complications of COVID. So if any of you are vitamin D deficient, please take supplements. That's kind of my advice to you. So nutrition is really important in terms of, we know that if people are poorly nourished, they're more likely to get ill. So we know that from a very basic point of view. But the micronutrients, the things that you should be eating, no one's really looked at that properly. And you have such a holistic system of medicine in India. You have so many different ways in which this is treated and paid attention to in traditional forms of medicine. There is real merit in starting to look at that properly. And that maybe you lead the world on that. I don't think anybody is looking at that properly. So there is, we know that, the low carb diets were poo-pooed. We know now that some of the low carb diets can reverse diabetes. So we're only just starting to scratch the surface of some of this. But I do, and the prebiotic story, actually, that's the biggest story that's, in the last 10 years has hit us, is the gut biome. The gut biome is a living organism in itself. And the types of biomes you have in your gut influence your mental health, your physical state, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So I don't think that's been paid much attention to. I think any startups and companies that are starting to explore that alongside of the human genome, I think layering that data with the genome data that we're starting to see to personalize the way we offer advice is going to be the future.
Great. Thank you, Niti. Varun, there is a question for you on, as the program scales up, how is this going to be looked at from a financing perspective?
Yeah. Well, so, there are two critical components here. And, when I was explaining the financing, I did not diverge a lot into details, but I think probably I can, give a bit more flavor to it. So the facility or the fund that we are making, as I mentioned, it has two components. One is the grant component, one is the debt component. Grant component, we would be awarding mini grants to innovators as well as to hospitals. To innovators, we would be providing mini grant for undertaking commercial validation of their particular products. For hospitals, we would be providing them if they want to, procure any essential supplies, like PPEs or, masks or probably like, 1 or 2 ventilators or something like that. But, the real crux is with regard to the debt capital. So the idea is that, there are a lot of innovators who are not able to access debt capital, either because they do not have the credentials, or the debt which is offered to them is at a very high rate of interest. So the idea is that how to give them, access to the debt capital, without any particular collateral, such that, an external entity can actually guarantee their particular debt capital. And that is where, the USP of this financing lies, is because we know a lot of startups, they say that, we have received work order, but we do not have working capital to manufacture the goods. And that is, really the area where this debt capital will kick in. And, the idea is that this is a sort of a, initiative that we are seeing. And, this is very much in a minister has been announcing. So, it's a sort of a access to some sort of a low cost or low collateral debt, wherein the idea is to provide working capital for, bigger ticket size, and for smaller ticket size, we can provide mini grants. So that is how the financing mechanism will work. And we have got, a very good interest from the private capital, both from the industry as well as some of the foundation, to get involved with something like this.
Okay, great. Thank you, Varun. There's one question which is on the opportunity for pharmacy related businesses. So let me take that. And I think there are 2-3 things. One is there's clearly an opportunity in India to digitize the pharmacy counter because a huge number of pharmacies in India are still not digitized. That's one. I think the other piece is we believe that the mix of what will be sold at a pharmacy will change as the days go by, and there may be a bigger uptake in supplements, in nutritional products, in other products along with prescription. And I think tracking that and any analytics that people can build around pharmacies in the long run will help. I think the other thing that will happen is, and we are seeing it already, is while e-commerce will flourish, so will hyperlocal models. So if you have thinking around what hyperlocal models could be in the pharmacy piece, and if you can entertain or if you can create refill related models, awareness or building awareness around patients or consumers on how to use pharmacy. I mean, I'd look to Varun or Niti to add, but there was a question specifically on what opportunities are pharmacies related businesses in India.
I mean, I can take very quickly. It's one of the pain points of the customer. So really getting the right medicine to the patient at the right time is going to be important, and also the cost. So if you can reduce costs by doing that, it is one of the major out-of-pocket spends that the customer faces in India and across the world, actually, not just in India. It's also in many, many other emerging markets. We've seen the same. So there is a huge need for the whole thing to be integrated. And I think, Amit, you said a really wonderful thing right at the start. We don't realize how integrated the healthcare systems really are. And it's that bit of it, that whole thing from supply chain to getting to the pharmacy, to digitize, to making sure, and using the pharmacist as your first point of contact for healthcare advice. That's the other thing that I don't think has been explored properly. We're working with a company in Kenya. John got more details on that, called Accelerator, and it's a chain of pharmacies that have been actually acting as a primary care front end. And where I'm finding more and more of those. You've got a great platform, 1mg in India, that's also doing similar things. It owns the customer now. So I think it's adding everything else on. So I think there is a great space for this. Many startups in the UK and across Europe also trying it out. The question for me is going to be, how do you integrate that into the whole health ecosystem and don't make the patient go flip from one app to the other for one thing or the other. It's all got to be in one place.
Great. I'm conscious of time. I think we've kind of run out of time. Any closing comments, Varun, from you or from Niti?
Well, Amit, I think I don't know though when we are going to enter into a post-COVID world, but as was resonated by both the president, by you as well as Niti, I think the post-COVID world is going to be a lot on technology. And especially when it comes to healthcare, it's going to massively rely on innovations. The pandemic has exposed some of the fault line when it comes to our deficit in infrastructure as well as the human resources. And to ensure that we strengthen our health system, I don't think so that I think it is a necessity. So it's just about a matter of time that this innovations start scaling up, because we have seen other industry like fintech and all, where this innovations and the startups, they have really become the sort of the largest of the companies. And I think now that is a revolution which is going to enter right from diagnostic manufacturers to providers to pharmacists who was sort of a reality check, and not only for India but for the world, because this is a problem that the world faces. And I think this was one of the reality check, and I think the post-COVID world is going to be all about innovations in healthcare. So I remain very optimistic, and as someone who is working closely with the government setup, I can say that the government is also very optimistic with regard to encouraging the innovations. And as whole, I think all of us are looking very closely to the Indian market, and we really expect that a lot of these innovations will get adopted at hospitals and will really scale and become the next unicorns of the country.
I hope so too. For me, just keep connected. We'd love to hear from all the entrepreneurs, the startups on here. We'd love to hear from you. TiE have our details. We'd love to keep connected to some interesting people, and to maybe look at funding for some of you that might want to move into the next bit of this. So do keep connected. And thank you very much, Amit, and for TiE Mumbai for organizing this.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Naveen, over to you.
Thank you, everyone. I think this was a great session. And folks who need to kind of get in touch with either Dr. Niti or Varun, I think their details are there on the chat, but I think we'll also send you a post event emailer with all the details on how to get in touch with them. And for both your teams, Varun and Niti, we will give you the entire script of the chat so that your people can answer them. And for all the entrepreneurs here, in about a week and a half's time, I think we will ask for a demo day of tech products where either you're pivoting or you're developing some great hacks in healthcare. So watch out. We'll also have people from Varun and Niti's team to kind of come and give you advice. It's not a fundraising thing, but it's more of a demo day which will kind of give you a strategic direction in what you want to do with your product. So watch out for that. Maybe in about a fortnight we will be doing that. And again, I thank you, Dr. Niti, thank you, Varun, thank you, Amit, for this wonderful session. We should be back to you guys within about 3 to 4 weeks time, as and when things develop, hopefully for the better. And maybe we'll pick your brains on the real post-COVID world and what startups need to do. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.